Hi folks, welcome back. Lovely to see lots of wee conferences going on all around. I'm sure lots of continuing fantastic conversations. Um, I should say a quick welcome back to people who've joined us online again, just to remind you that we've got lots of people, about 150 folks signed up who are joining us online. So if you're still with us, we're glad you're here. We hope you're finding the conference as engaging as we are here in the room too. Thank you to those of you who have been commenting on the Pinewood management principles and also on our resolution. I'm just going to keep plugging that. So you've got lunchtime opportunity coming up soon. If you've not looked at either of those, then please do. We've got one presentation slot before lunch. And we're going to be thinking about this Pinewood partnership that you've heard us talk a little bit more about. And I'm really pleased that we've got a stand-in for poor Steve Micklewright from Trees for Life, who was due to be here. He's not well today, so we send our best wishes to Steve for a speedy recovery. But it's a pleasure to welcome Alan McDonnell, who's the Head of Nature Restoration at Trees for Life. There's a job title for you. So Alan is going to come, and at short notice, we're very grateful that he stepped in. So Alan has said, we're going to use Slido for questions. Slido is open already, so as Alan speaks, feel free to get your questions for him there. But let's be gentle with Alan, because he's had about 18 hours notice to put this together. But do please put your questions together into Slido for Alan. We'll have time for that before lunch. So without further ado, welcome Alan. Come and tell us about the Pinewood Partnership. That's your reason. Okay.
Thanks, Alistair. Yeah, the official line is that Steve has COVID, but actually as part of the Northern Irish takeover, he's waking up with a sore head in County Armagh somewhere, so good luck to him. So yeah, I'm here representing a group of organisations that have been working on what a partnership could look like for Caledonian pinewoods, and to really recognise the importance of pinewoods and develop momentum for action. So you've all had a draft prospectus in terms of what that could be, and we're really interested in what we want to see as support for that and for stuff to move forward from here. So please support that. Offer feedback on it as well. It's still in draft form, so there's time to comment on that. We're really interested in your thoughts on that. And to be founder members of this partnership. So make this work. Yeah, I think everybody knows, we've established over the last couple of days just how special and unique Caledonian pinewoods are. What's also been interesting, it was really interesting when Alistair put up the request for kind of how you were all feeling yesterday morning. It was that mix of optimism and frustration. And it's been really interesting. I was talking to somebody at the break there who's been involved in pinewoods for 40 years. And they said, well, we never imagined it would be like this 40 years hence. 40 years ago, the importance of these habitats and how special they are was recognized. And the sense that, we'd still be in pretty much the same situation now, just that wasn't there. So, and that, I think it was Shyla put up the report from George Peterkin about the new dawn for woodlands was it 1994? And here we are in 2024, and it still feels like we need a new dawn. So what we need now is action. And that's going to need collaboration, and it's going to need us to work together, and it's going to need us to be strategic. So let's engage with what these factors are. We know what they are, but let's recognize at the same time that we've known this for ages, and the time has come for progress. So the barriers, biophysical factors that are affecting Caledonian pinewoods and preventing recovery, deer and herbivores, a key part of that, the way they can prevent natural regeneration, even behind fences, as James described. So, a lesson to learn there. Invasive non-native species, Sitka and rhododendron, probably the ones that are kind of most prominent for Caledonian pinewoods, and James's work on the CPI demonstrates that. And as well as those kind of old threats, if you like, we've got new factors coming into place. Climate change, and the effects that can have and how that's affecting where pinewood moves in the landscape, and really underlining the importance of pinewoods to have mobility to adapt to that and become resilient over time. And the potential for tipping points as well, to be mindful of resilience of this habitat is going to be vital. Building that resilience is going to be vital. And then related to climate change, disease is coming through, perhaps being enabled for pathogens to move more in a different climate. So we've got a multiple set of factors that will interact to engage with. It's also really important to remember the huge efforts that have been made in the past to prevent further decline. Those have been vital to what we have now. Our inheritance from that period of activity, particularly in the 90s, is what we have now. And there's a need to make sure that that work is not undone. So let's secure that from what we have. We also know, this is what we're talking about, we need to step up the efforts to engage with these issues. And make sure that previous work isn't just not undone, but it performs a foundation for what we're moving forward from. So that's why kind of we think a partnership is going to be key, and a partnership that's focused on action. If you look at the way a lot of the kind of thinking here is based on the impact the Alliance for Scotland's Rainforest has had, and the draft prospectus actually is heavily draws on that unashamedly, because there's a sense that that alliance is starting to move the dial and really raise the profile of this in a new way for the rainforest. So can we do the same for Caledonian pinewoods? Secure those past efforts and form a joint voice to move on from them. So what will be the point of a Caledonian Pinewood partnership in more detail? The first would be to unite around a shared vision. We talk about all these things, we all have slightly different ways of expressing them, but they all have a much clearer set of messages in terms of what they're about and where this can go and the potential it has for the future and the value of that can act as a guiding star for the future where this partnership can go. Some of that, we need pinewoods that will be flourishing, thriving, and diverse ecosystems that possess some of the characteristics that James was talking about yesterday, the diversity, the mobility, the connectivity, the continuity that they need to survive as ecological expressions of what nature can do. We need pinewoods that are connected instead of fragmented. Big issue here. We've got lots of those CPI sites, lots of wild pine sites that Jane is finding. Very small, on their last legs. They need to join up to become more resilient. And there's something here about that I thought was actually coming through from the stage last night about pinewoods being celebrated and cherished and understood as part of the fabric and the weave of this country and what it's about and how people interact with that landscape. There's an emotional side to this to connect with, and the benefits that pinewoods bring for people and bring for as well as for nature cover a whole range of things, and we should be celebrating that and putting that positive message out there in terms of for the people we need to influence and the people who we can bring onto this, get onto this wagon. So a partnership would focus initially on, well, in two kind of time frames. There's a short-term need. I forget the exact number. I think it's 27% of the CPI sites that James surveyed are critically threatened. Like they're about to expire. They're a vital part of coming back. They've got the genetic material, they've got the soils, they can be the basis we can regenerate from. But they need action, and they need it short term. So we need to prioritize that and bring that message through and look at dealing with those kind of factors we're talking about, whether that's the herbivores and the deer, the invasive species, the need to restore pause, and the need to get natural regeneration working at scale and have buffer zones around these habitats, around these pinewoods, so they're more resilient. We also need to think about the medium and long term now. We need to start building that long-term foundation now. Some of that is about working on the collaborations that will be needed on the ground in order to deliver the management in practice. So that's about relationships, and it's about using new tools that are emerging, say to guide deer management, approaches to that, new conversations that are happening around deer management, such as finding the common ground on deer. There's much more consensus out there than perhaps we recognize if we're in our bubbles. Perhaps we need different actions and different approaches to invasives control. Maybe it needs new powers or new levels of resources to ensure that when we invest, we're not wasting money on short-term activity that carries out one rhododendron control and doesn't do the follow-up, or leaves the neighbouring ground with a seed source on it. So a new determination around that. We need a united plan to allow pinewoods to expand and connect, and we're going to need funding, as we were discussing this morning and probably throughout, for more diverse sources, and to be very open about where those might come from. and for that funding to sustain the livelihoods that Pinewoods can deliver and already rely on. Deer management, we've been talking about a lot. There's a few hundred deer stalkers in Scotland. We need those people. We need those people to have followers and successors. So those livelihoods have to endure. And ultimately, we need to get more stuff done. It goes down to that. So whilst we can, and there have been great discussions, we need to build those into action. We can't just have another talking shop. So what does signing up involve? There's a whole range of ways to get involved. We're looking for organizations to sign up, and we have support already from the main agencies who've been involved in this. Scottish Forestry, Forestry and Land Scotland, Nature Scot, they're all in their different ways indicating their strong support for this and this approach. We saw similar messages from Jim Fairley, the Minister, this morning. They're looking for these kind of new approaches and connections to be made to make stuff work. But there's also rules for individuals to sign and offer support. So share your perspective. We will need policy change, and there might be need for different attitudes and approaches to that. So how we affect government, how we talk to government, and those relationships are going to be key, and the joint voices we have to collaborate and putting that message across are going to be key. So I'm just going to close now and say that we can take responsibility for the future. We can take a positive attitude to what's possible into that future, focus on what can be achieved, focus on what's needed, and use the compelling evidence we've seen over the last day and a half to make that case and to move forward with. But more than everything else, we need your support. And we need this investment of time that's gone into this conference and all the work that's been done over the past 40 years to mean something. So please come sign the partnership. I'll be at the Trees for Life stand during lunch. Please come and sign, or look out for the emails and the website updates that are going to follow in the next few weeks about this. Support and evidence of support is a first step to moving things forward into action. So please sign up. Please make this worthwhile. Let's not wait another 40 years to make progress. Thank you. Cheers.
Seeing there's only two of us, I'm going to join you here in a seat. Some good questions coming in. You can upvote. You can ask new questions. Nothing here too tricky for you, Alan. You can breathe easy. All right, I think the questions are going to come up behind me, so I can't actually hack the system because everyone's going to know what the questions are. All right, so here we go. And the first question isn't actually about the partnership. So as good as partnership approaches are, do we not also need better statutory protections and enforcement for our native pine woods? You talked a little bit about the policy world, and maybe that's something that the partnership will be looking at. So do we need stronger statutory protections?
I think we need, stronger enforcement and regulation, certainly in terms of, especially where public money is being invested. We need to see that deliver. And I've been to too many woods where grant money has gone in and the action hasn't necessarily been followed through by the landowner. And there may be a whole range of reasons for that. But at a time when money is shorter than ever, and the need is becoming ever more critical and sharp, we need to see that follow through. And so there needs to be a commitment to quality from all involved, and that when somebody signs and accepts public money, then they need to commit very clearly in their own minds to that action following through and delivering quality results.
A good question here about communities and the role that they play in ensuring that our pine woods are valued and protected, and how do you see communities potentially playing a role in the partnership?
I think we all know communities have building the stake and the stake that communities have in land and the nature on that land is kind of really vital to the future, and seeing that, building that body of support for change and progress. So there's the fact that people value having more nature in the land around them is something that's really relevant to this conversation. And I think, as we were doing this morning in one of the workshops, exploring how there can be meaningful, tangible benefits to communities from this progress, whether that's through funding streams or through opportunities that can come from bringing nature back. I think those are both going to be very important.
I guess you've talked about the lessons we can draw from the Alliance for Scotland's Rainforests, and certainly there are some interesting examples there of how communities have played a pretty key and continues to play a pretty key role in that work. So we've got some nice examples to draw from there. Here's a question that has come up very regularly throughout the last couple of days, and again, it's not really linked to the partnership, although it might be something the partnership wants to wrestle with. Advice or thoughts on achieving change for landowners who share boundaries with traditional stocking estates, who have got different management objectives, and who want high deer numbers? Easy question.
Yeah. I mean, I guess that's about understanding the need to. I think this is about looking forward and saying, well, what's really behind that need to have high deer numbers? Is it just, do those deer really need to be there, or is that to support a sporting model? And how do we achieve that sporting model with fewer deer? And there are parts of the deer sector, ADMG amongst them, who are starting to actively engage with that question. So everything we know about deer biology and the need for actually, we don't need as many deer as we currently have in some places to maintain a stag cull. That kind of thinking needs to come and be followed through across much more of management. And I think that's, at times, there's going to need to be a strong policy support for that, and hopefully we'll see that in the Natural Environment Bill next year. At the same time, working with those estates to help them see, well, how this can work for them, whether that's at stalker level, those people who are vital to this future, or the landowners as well, who are in a whole range of different circumstances, so how they maintain their operations if they've got a sporting dependency there. So in a way, that kind of sporting income can be as important to this Pinewood partnership as habitat progress. The two are very closely linked in that kind of circumstance.
And we're not starting from a blank sheet of paper, in the sense you've been very involved in the Common Ground Forum and in conversations with the traditional estate community. And I mean, do you see any, I guess, can you share any examples of hope or encouragement from those conversations with people that one might have pigeonholed as being very different management objectives to us, but who are on a journey towards where we think we'd like to see them?
Yeah, I mean, not just through that, but a number of people who've been here have talked about the kind of different sorts of conversations they're having with landowners now who are looking to change. And we've also seen, collaboration that we just wouldn't have seen 3 years ago between Scottish Environment Link and the Association of Deer Management Groups and the Scottish Gamekeepers Association are now part of Common Ground, jointly advocating to government for changes to deer policy where there is some agreement. So we can build on that, on those positive overlaps, and hopefully overcome the barriers and the polarities that this situation's created over many years.
I was chatting to someone earlier on, and my perception is now that there are a number of traditional estates who perhaps a few years ago were quite antagonistic and felt quite threatened by this, who are now, I guess, seeing where the wind is blowing, also looking at the examples of places like Mar Lodge and others now to see that maybe 10, 15 years ago there was a question around, is this actually going to make any difference? And the clear answer now is yes, it will. And I'm detecting a kind of a sense of a shift from, no, we don't want to do this, to we're interested, but we don't kind of know how. It's complicated, it's difficult, our ground is remote, extraction is difficult, venison markets are poor. Our whole model is built around something that, and therefore the need being to find a new model, if you like, that can make what we think is the right direction possible. So I just want to kind of, you mentioned looking at a kind of, if you like, new developing model of stalking, a hunting model that's based around a low deer density, high nature outcome kind of model. And so I'm just going to raise a little flag if anyone's interested in potentially joining a workshop where we might look at that in more detail. Please let me know. It's been really positive that Tom Turnbull, who's the chair of ADMG, is very, very interested in having a conversation like that. So if that's something that you're interested in joining, then do let me know. These questions are jumping around. Okay, here's one. You argue for a partnership of action, yet the one obvious action, planting, is regarded with horror by most of the conservation bodies or regulators. Why do we regard planting with horror? Do we? If so, in what cases and why?
Yeah, I don't think horror is the right word for it. I think there's a strong call, and we've heard the strong call of the last day or so for much more natural regeneration, and that as the most ecologically resilient way for a pinewood to recover and to expand. But of course, there are situations and circumstances when there's no seed source available, where planting is going to be needed. And so I think we should be very open about that and not chuck any tools out of the box. But let's acknowledge that this is about ecological processes, and a failure to enable those at scale is what has brought us to this over decades. We do need to address that. So we need to have both tools, but I think fully take on the huge difficulties. It's easy to say that, what I just said, but the huge difficulties involved in that are something we either embrace, or, in my view, we're just accepting a slow decline. Maybe we slow the rate of decline, but that decline will endure.
I'm just going to give a bit of advance warning to either John Risby or Brendan that this next question is probably one that you would be better equipped to answer, and the mics up here, if our sound guys are able to enable them, will enable you to do that. So I wonder if one of you would be up for answering this question, and it was partly dealt with in the workshop around where's the money coming from, but there's certainly a perception that current funding, grant funding priorities is fencing and planting, so we're back to this issue. How can finance be refocused on deer management and natural regeneration? So I can't see you, but I'm sure you're here. Brendan, are you there? Come on, Brendan, come on up. It's not fair to ask anyone else to answer this question. Jill's got a handheld for you, Brendan, so come on up. And well done, Brendan, for being bumped into appearing on stage without any forward notice. Come on up.
Is it switched on? Yeah, it is.
It is. So I'll just read the question again for you, which is, current grants prioritize fencing and planting, which rarely achieves real benefits. How can finance be refocused on deer management and natural regeneration?
Okay, I'll deconstruct that a little bit. I wouldn't have used the word prioritise. I mean, I think the grant scheme supports both. I think there's an argument as to how it's weighted and whether it's interpreted, or in some situations it's more incentive for planting and fencing. But we certainly, I mean, if we think about the journey on FGS, we started off cautiously on natural regen. We always want it to be a component, and we actually had great ambitions for deer management. But I think, as I've said in some of the groups I've been in, we can't force people's hands. We can't even really afford to bribe people. We can really only work with the willing on these things. And as we've been discussing in the various groups here, there is a sort of change in the mood, and as generations change and society changes, I think there's likely to be more willing large-scale owners and participants. And I could give you some examples. Like John recently we were at a meeting with the National Park, and we were just doing some analysis, and half of the woodland expansion in the Cairngorms National Park, so over the last, I guess, 8 or 9 years, has been through natural regeneration, so 50% of it. And we're paying for deer management over, must be close to 50,000 hectares. And you are the public funds in the Cairngorms National Park, and that gradually. So we heard this, obviously the Mar Lodge story, but it's similar on some other big estates, and they've been doing it just as long. I think there's more we can do, but even it ministers, words to us. He sort of drew us back to the changes that were made last year, and a couple of those were about trying to readjust that balance. So we did find a way, and we're constrained by our systems and the challenges of change, and where IT and government processes are involved. But we did find a way to increase the payment for natural regeneration. All our grants are a contribution to cost, which is we're not actually paying an income to people for doing things, rewarding things. We're contributing to the cost, which is a further thing. But the other thing we did, which again I don't know, maybe not many people have looked at, but I think it's very relevant here, is that we've managed to sort of develop some of the options in the forestry grant scheme to pay over not just the woodland area but the landscape area. So on the reducing deer impact grant, the change that was made last year was to make that eligible for even smaller projects. I mean, we're nervous about supporting deer management on tiny areas where it can't achieve the change on its own. You need to do this at scale. But we did reduce the area, and John will correct me, I can't remember if we went down to 1,000 or 500 hectares. But that's what we've been doing in the Cairngorms, and I was quite excited by certainly the visits I was on yesterday at Lower Glen Nevis, that there's definitely the potential with this partnership, once it decides what it wants to do and how the cooperation will work, to move in that direction. So, I mean, it's going to be a few years before we have dramatic changes or the potential for significant changes in the grant, but we will continue to look at opportunities to evolve and move in this direction. And you know, if projects come to us of a large scale that could really make a strategic difference at the Scotland level, and what we're offering doesn't quite work, we'll look seriously at that, and you know, how could we do it differently? How could we engage? So hopefully I keep losing the questions to jump around, but hopefully that's some of what you were looking for, but happy if there's any follow-ups or you want to challenge me on that.
Could I just add, Alistair, that we always focus on the forestry grant scheme, but I think there's a wider budget piece here about land use and the whole range of public money that goes into land, and can we use that wider budget more wisely on greater priorities? If there's a real priority on Pinewoods or on the rainforest, should all the burden of that fall on forestry grant scheme just because it's trees? If we've got these outcomes for nature and it's existential to climate and nature emergencies, then I think we should be much more flexible about where that goes. And it's concerning at the minute that the Strategic Deer Board, for instance, are saying, well, there doesn't seem to be the kind of money to offer significant incentives for deer management beyond what's in the FGS. And I think that's going to be quite a problem to achieving the objectives that everybody agrees need to be achieved.
Great, super. Thank you, Brendan, for being willing to jump up at short notice. If you want a follow-up question, you know how to ask it. But of course, it's fantastic. It's just great to have people like Brendan and John here. And I hope you heard that invitation. If you've got thoughts, if you've got suggestions and ideas, these guys' ears are open. So do make use of that. So. Thank you very much, Brendan.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Super. Jill will grab your mic, but I think Brendan deserves a little round of applause for diving into the lion's den. Diving into the lion's den like that. So you talked, Alan, a little bit about, I guess, the partnership having a potential policy strand, and the question is, what does influencing the government look like in practice? You get any sort of early thoughts about what direction that might take, where the opportunities might lie?
Yeah, I think it probably looks like quite a diverse set of actions, actually. So we've got fairly traditional advocacy and setting out, making policy recommendations and working through that, and there are people here working in that sphere. We talked about the community voices as well, and bringing them forward and building, again, this idea of partnership and the sense that there's broad support for this and that they can command some political capital in doing that. I think building that's important. And something Andy Whiteman talks a lot about is acting as if. If we can kind of paraphrase Andy, let's kind of set out what that better future can look like and how it can work in practice and say, well, this is what's going to happen, right? Because it delivers these benefits and it lines up with where we're going. And so I was kind of putting that almost down as a challenge, as a gauntlet down to saying, well, let's pick this up and work because it's around what we all want to see. There's a shared consensus for it, and there's a practical plan to do it.
I'm wondering if we just spring that on you mentioned Andy. Andy, are you still here? I just wondered, would you be willing to pop up? Because last night, you just shared a couple of opportunities that you see on the horizon for influencing some significant legislation that's coming through. Would you be up for grabbing a mic and just giving us a sense of that? Jill, if you're all right to... Well done, sorry. Thank you, Andy, for being... Well, but you're one of our policy experts here, so where do you see the opportunities in the next couple of years?
Hello. Yeah.
Yeah.
As you mentioned earlier, I think the partnership needs to be focused on action. And for example, there's an agricultural act passed. All the detail has to be filled in. So that's the sort of wider public funding on land use. There's a natural environment bill, not been introduced yet. There's a deer bill, not been introduced yet. There's a land reform bill going through Parliament. There's the review of the forestry grant scheme. We've never actually had so many opportunities to improve the prospects for Scotland's ancient Caledonian pinewoods. And certainly when people were meeting, I first was going to conference about pinewoods 40 years ago, you were lobbying Scottish office ministers and the Secretary of State for Scotland, and it was difficult. Now we have a Scottish Parliament. This is the first environment in which we've met in the context that it's actually possible, it's possible to actually have direct influence into what's happening in important aspects of our natural environment. And we have government officials here who are, broadly speaking, personally at least, very sympathetic with this. So yeah, those are some of the opportunities. And I think if we don't grasp them soon, this 29 or 38%, is it critically endangered in the West here? They're going to be gone. They are going to be gone in 40 years' time, almost certainly, with all the new challenges that Alan was talking about in relation to climate and pests in particular. 40 years ago, they were not on our horizon. We weren't thinking about them. Those are new challenges, and given the state that they're in, we don't have time.
Andy, before you leave the stage, I'm wondering if you would take the next question, which is really your specialist subject, which is about what role land reform legislation might play in protecting our native pine woods.
Okay, I didn't ask that. Well, I mean, I take a fairly fundamentalist view of this in that if you just look at the CPI sites, they're owned by a very, very small number of people. Many of those people don't live here. The ones in Glen Nevis, for example, owned by the GFG Alliance, it's less than 1% of their whole landholding. Why is this so difficult, So, I mean, I certainly feel that the direction of travel of much of land reform legislation is to put responsibilities as well as rights in land ownership. We have a land rights and responsibility statement. It is just a statement. It's a piece of paper. We need to put that into action. And I think the new land reform bill, the compulsory management plans for large-scale holdings, I think give a huge opportunity to be able to insist that there must be provisions in this for, already there are, but there should be provisions in this, for example, on how you intend to bring Caledonian pine inventory sites and other ancient native woodlands into a healthy and resilient position. In other words, you must, by law, declare how you're intending to do that. And that's not a requirement on landowners at the moment. They don't have to tell us what they intend to do about it. And that could be a big step forward. Ultimately, I think it should be a duty. I think if you're going to own these sites, you have a duty to restore. If you don't want to do that, don't own them. Give them to somewhere else, sell it, walk away, whatever. Because, as I said, these threats, these challenges of climate and stuff are not going to give us the time that we once thought we might have.
Super. Thank you, Andy. And again, thank you for being willing to be jumped up onto stage with zero notice. Much appreciated.
Sir. Just add one point on influencing government.
Yeah, sure, Alan.
Just want to add one point on influencing government and the role of the partnership. The partnership will have the support of some agencies. We need to be mindful and use those different voices differently. So there are positions that agencies can't take. And so when it comes to influencing and advocacy, then it's important to respect that and to keep boundaries between where they can be part of that conversation and where they need to be separate from it. So the partnership needs to be pragmatic about that and respect the position that Nature Scottish Forestry, etc., are in. So we can use that, but we need to respect that difference and the limitations.
And I think the Rainforest Alliance has demonstrated a route forward to manage that carefully and sensitively. Yeah, great. Yeah, gosh, the last time I looked at the question, this one wasn't here, but all right. How can DMG's deer management groups be positively engaged in the plight for pine woods? Again, you've got to know that sector well through Common Ground Forum. Insights on how DMGs can be positively engaged.
I think some would say they already are. I think it's interesting seeing since you opened the conversations the way some of those DMGs are starting to move and it being easier to discuss openly the deer management that's required by, say, an NGO that's deciding we're really going to reduce hard here. I was talking to somebody from an NGO this morning, and they're going into quite widespread and quite steep deer reductions, and have gone through quite a bit of fire for that. And then just recently, that's starting to change. So that's an example of, and I think some of that has come down to, it sounds like it's come down to the kind of common ground process and the discussions within that deer sector and around that group about the need to respect the differences in that, because the discourse has moved on, and some DMG members are on board with that and working with it as best they can, and some aren't yet. And so there's a need to sort of to have a little patience and to let that play through in time, and to find, again, pragmatic ways to face into what their concerns are and to look after those, help look after them as well, to get the interest we want to see come forward.
Right, thank you. A question that I think a lot of us who were very involved in the Rainforest Alliance were asking as the idea of a Pinewood Alliance was emerging was, this looks like a very sensible way to go, but how do we manage potential conflict or dilution with what the Alliance for Scotland's Rainforest is doing? So have you any kind of early thoughts on how we, I guess, how we can build on what the ASR is doing without competing with and kind of colliding with what they're trying to do?
No. But I think, I think some of it's about talking about the scale of seeing this as overall as a need for nature recovery. And that there are pine woods in the rainforest zone, and so there's natural overlap there, and there's already collaboration on that within the Alliance. But where we're looking at pine woods elsewhere, or outside that, then it's just a matter of respecting, well, there are kind of different priorities there. So the more there's, I think, dialogue around where the focus should be and where resources should be prioritized to, the healthier that conversation will be.
And I think as part of an organisation that played and does play a significant role in the ASR, well, it's interesting to see that we're kind of the same group of people coming around the table. So this isn't a bunch of different people with a competing agenda. It's largely the same people who've also got a shared passion. I think that the point you made is very valid, which actually a lot of the particular challenges and threats to the pinewood, as we've already heard, are on the west and are actually in rainforest areas. And it's a shame that Julie's not here, because I think Julie Stoneman, she would have been able to add a really interesting perspective to that. But Julie has been part of the conversation about the Pinewood Partnership. She was brought in early to kind of share some of the lessons learned from the ASR. And I think the whole conversation has happened in a very healthy kind of open way. So I guess as someone who's strongly supportive of both, I feel pretty confident that we can navigate those potential risks pretty well and wisely. All right, probably last question, I think. What are your thoughts on John Muir Trust's proposal for a carbon emissions land tax? Nothing to do with what you were talking about, but go on.
Yeah. Well, I think, given the context of the time we're in, you can see absolutely where that proposal has come from and the relevance of it. I'm just starting to actually engage properly with Thomas about this and understand where it could be. I think that the key to it is, if we're looking at transition and this being part of transition for land management, then there needs to be a clear pathway in terms of how people can navigate their way through that. So I think if we can provide that, then I think there's absolutely a case to say this is an existential problem for us, and therefore we are looking at a measure like this, but there's also a pathway to follow that will be sustainable for you, but also for the country overall. So I think it's finding that balance and treating that conversation with sensitivity, because it, like a lot of these conversations, can quickly lead to polarity and very emotional conversations, which will tend to do more damage than good to the long term, the relationships we really need to sustain this. So I think provide a pathway, clear pathway in terms of how things can go, and then have the conversation in a sensitive way. But I would absolutely support that going ahead.
Thank you. We're out of time for questions, but I'm just going to acknowledge the top question that's on the screen there, which is maybe more just of a challenge. I think the hope was that you would have Julie Stoneman sitting in the seat, not me. Sadly, a couple of days ago that fell through. So yeah, we had very intensely planned to have Julie playing a much bigger role here, but we note that comment, and certainly I'll just make a little plug for the evaluation forms that are in your packs. We would really like you to complete those before you leave here, because we know how easy it is for those bits of paper to get lost and for you to forget as life takes over. We'll plug that again later, but please do make sure you feed comments like that through using the evaluation forms. So just a reminder, Alan will be at the Trees for Life stand, ready and able to take your questions and chat more if you've got any questions about how you might get involved or other thoughts around the direction that the partnership should take. Alan, I'm sure, will be very keen to talk to you. But please, a big thank you to Alan for stepping in at such short notice into the hot seat. Thank you, Alan. All right, it is now time for lunch. It's a buffet lunch out in the foyer, and we're going to be back in here at 1:45 for our kind of final home straight. So you've got about 50 minutes to enjoy lunch and conversation. Make sure you're seeing what's on out there in the interaction zone, and enjoy your lunch. It's not in the foyer, sorry, things have changed. It's round behind the curtains, so please go and enjoy there. Thank you, Joyce.